Welcome to this week's Contemporary Halacha Shir. The title is Tevilas Keilim for Gifts, a very interesting topic connected to this week's parasha as ever. If you're listening online, please do go to the website torahtoday.org for the handout. Why are we discussing it this week? Because Parshas Matzos Maseh contain the psukim, which are the source for the whole concept of Tevilas Keilim. How so? Well, after the battle of Midian, just before Moshe Rabbeinu is about to take leave of this world, the pasuk says, "Vayomer Elazar hakohen el anshe hatzava, zois chukas haTorah." This is the chok of the Torah, asher tzivo Hashem es Moshe, and he teaches the halachas of Haggadah, Libun, and Tevilas Keilim. What does that mean? So, of course, if you've got Keilim from a non-Jewish person or have been used for treif, you've got to kasher them, whatever the appropriate kashering is, Libun or Haggadah, or whatever it may be. But even things which have not become treif, you still need to tovel them. That is called Tevilas Keilim, and that is what really the pasuk says. All different types of metal Keilim, gold and silver. Necheshes is copper, bedil iron, barzel is iron, bedil tin, ofaris is lead. You've got to kasher them. You've got to expel the absorptions of treif. And even things which do not come into contact with fire, which were not used for cooking and have not absorbed any treifus, then tavir b'mayim, they still need to be passed through water. And the Gemara in Avodah Zarah discusses the extra word v'toher to teach me the halachas of Tevilas Keilim. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan says, by way of background, if you look at the next box, B'partis in Yerodeh Siman Kuf Chav Pasif Aleph, B'Parshas Matzos B'Kli Midjan Ksiv Vayomer Elazar quotes these psukim, Koloma Kol Davar She'ein Tashmish Aladei Ha'or. There are things which have not been used with fire, with any source of heat. Could go in kaisis for sloiches. You've got glasses and things like that. Shetashmishon b'tzaynein, which are only used for cold. V'lo balu isa, and have not absorbed anything which is forbidden, any treif. Tavir b'mayim matbilo v'day. You just have to be tovel them, and that is sufficient. And that is what we're very familiar with. That if you buy some crockery, some cutlery, then they need Tevilas Keilim. Most poskim say that metal requires Tevilim in HaTorah, and glass and other materials only need Midrabanon. But either way, we are tovel many Keilim. But as we'll see, it's dafka klei su'udah. It's the Keilim which are going to come into contact with food used as part of a meal. And that's important because the Shulchan Aruch says, if you look at the third box, he talks about something called a knife which is lachtich klofim. At the end, the Shulchan Aruch says in Hilchas Tevilas Keilim in Yerodeh, in Siman Kuf Chaf, in Sif Ches, he says that if you didn't buy it for food purposes, but to cut parchment, so you take a knife in order to cut parchment for similar use, you don't need to be tovel it. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan on that says something important. You go after the majority usage of the Keili. In other words, for example, you've got a knife which is not really used for kli suda, for a meal or for food purposes. Could go in sakin shekonin noise lachtich klofim. Our example, a knife used to cut parchment. A sofa might use it. Velasos kulmas, velachtich tzipronaim, to make quills to write with ink, or lachtich tzipronaim, or even to cut your nails. Even though you could use it not just for parchment, but occasionally you could use it for food purposes, you go after the majority usage. And that is not unanimous, because as the Aruch HaShulchan continues, there is the opinion of the Issa V'Heter. The Issa V'Heter is a famous Rishon. He says that sakin cotton shel seifrim shechoitchin bein klofim also lechel bein ara. Even for occasional usage for food, you're not allowed to use it im lo tovle. And his concern is that you'll come to use it, I suppose, for food and for kli suda, and therefore he doesn't even allow occasional usage. And although that opinion is rejected, it's going to have important significance soon. And based on that, the Taz and indeed the Shach as well, on this halacha of the Shulchan Aruch, that a knife used lachtech klofim for parchments, not for food. Based on that, the Taz quotes the Beis Yosef and says, the same is true that if you use a knife, if you buy a knife, not to use it as a klei suda, but rather it's used as l'schoira for merchandise, ein tzarich tvila. And therefore, if a person has a shop, he owns a shop like a hardware store or a gift shop or something like that, and he buys goods in order to sell on to somebody else, the owner of the shop will not need to do tefillah. It's the end user, the person who buys it, to use the knife for food, for kli suda, that he will need to do tefillah. Okay, that's sort of the introduction, really. But the big question is, what about buying gifts? If you buy a gift for somebody else, and sometimes you mean very well, but and you let's say you're invited out, you and your family are invited out for a Shabbos meal to another family, and you know that the host family would appreciate a new challah knife. You were there a few months ago, and the balabos was cutting the challah, really struggling. He could do with a new challah knife, something a little bit sharper and nicer. So you want to buy a new challah knife. And to do him a favor, you buy the challah knife and you tovel it for him. Or sometimes you go to a Jewish-owned hardware store or a gift shop, and they do a service for you where they actually tovel the Keilim for you. Now that is quite problematic. Why? Because, as I've written over here, these are not klei suda. They're klei matona. If I'm buying something to give as a gift to somebody else, you could argue, as poskim do, that what I'm buying now is not really a klei suda, but it's got a din of a kli matona. It's an item which is going to be given as a gift, and in a way, it's better not to tovel it because it might have the same halacha as a sakin, as a knife used lachtech klofim, to cut parchment. V'uadin l'schoira, says the Taz in the name of the Beis Yosef, and therefore it shouldn't need tefillah. Because they're not klei suda, they're klei matona, they're klei schoira, they're merchandise, whatever they may be, and therefore, according to some poskim, it's better not to tovel before giving a gift. What if you receive a gift where the person proudly says to you, "Don't worry, I've taken it to the Keilim mikveh, and I've dipped it for you." So poskim say that if you've received a gift where the giver has toveled it, it's best to tovel it again, but without a bracha. Why? Because the halacha might be like the Issa V'heta. If the Issa V'heta is, according to him, even Keilim, which are not klei suda, which are klei schora or anything else, do require tefillah, because you don't go after the majority use. In case you might come to use it occasionally for that, he would require tefillah, and therefore when the person bought it for you, it did need tefillah according to this v'heta, and therefore it was a valid tefillah. So we are choshish for that, and therefore if you received a gift where the person gave it to you, he toveled it, it's best to tovel it without a bracha. I should add, by the way, this only refers to Keilim which have been made by non-Jewish people, and therefore stam in chutz la'aretz, unless you know otherwise, then the majority of things are not made by Jewish people, and therefore they would require tefillah. But if you buy it in Eretz Yisrael, you can assume that it's been made by a Jewish person, unless you know otherwise. You can check it out. If it was, you go to Meir Sharm, you buy something which says made in China, then I guess it could be different. But it depends very much on how it was made. That is the question. Now the background is the Tshuvas Fanhogas. Moshe Sternbuch has a fascinating tshuva about this very topic, and let's go through it together and we'll see. Says Moshe Sternbuch, Ha'olam, this is in the second paragraph number 5, it's in Tshuvas Fanhogas, Krach Aleph Siman Tov Nun Beis. Ha'olam na'agu lahatzbil v'achkach loses matana. People have a custom that they can be tovel something and then they give it as a matana, again for the best of reasons, the best of intentions, to save the recipient of the gift going to the Keilim mikveh. But it presumably seems that the tefillah was not effective, or machshil hamakabel, because you tell the person receiving it that I've been toveled it and everything is fine, but perhaps it's not fine. That's the Shulchan Aruch I quoted earlier, that if you buy a knife which is used to cut parchment, i.e. is not a tzorech suda, you don't need to be tovel it. That if it was bought for merchandise to sell on, also it doesn't need tefillah. Next paragraph, in a famous sefer called Tevilas Keilim, he brings poskim who say, a merchant, Keilim, who sells Keilim, that if, like I said, if a gift store or hardware store, they have a service that they're going to tevel something in order to make it easier for the purchaser, Shadain ein kan chiyuv tefillah. If he's teveled all of his merchandise before he sold it, then it could be that there's no chiyuv tefillah, and therefore it doesn't help. However, the buyer shouldn't then go ahead and tevel with a bracha. He should do it without a bracha, and a tevel below bracha, like I explained. True, he's selling it as kli suda. He's selling it as a knife or a fork or whatever it may be, a pot or a pan, to be used as klei suda, but for him it's klei schayra. And therefore you can apply it as well in the case of a gift. But if a person bought it not for him to use as kli suda but to give as a gift, and therefore, according to Moshe Sternbuch, that you shouldn't be tevel a gift that you're going to give, because it's questionable whether the tefillah is in fact effective, and the recipient of such a gift should actually tevel it without a bracha, as I've explained. Now, the question is this: what if you are buying a gift for a non-religious person? Let's say you have a friend, a co-worker, whatever it may be, and you want to give him or her a gift, and you know that they're not going to tevel it. What do you do then? So according to Moshe Sternbuch, you got a problem either way, because you can't tevel it beforehand because it's a kli matana. According to him, the tefillah may not be effective, but you know the person receiving it is not going to tevel it. So what do you do? So Moshe Sternbuch addresses this in the third paragraph. He continues. I'm sort of unsure to a person who is secular, who is not religious, giving him a kli which is not going to use with tefillah, because it's not going to go to the Keilim mikvah, could be a problem of lifnei iver. And for you, the giver, to tevel it beforehand is not going to be effective. So what should you do? So he's got two eitzes. You can imply the principle of zachin le'adam shalei b'fanov. You can give it to a third party to acquire it on behalf of the recipient, and therefore it's now his. It's got the status of a kli suda. You are then tevel it, and then you wrap it up nicely. You give it to him as a gift, and problem sorted. I should add, in the Sefer Tevilas Keilim, Rav Shlomo Zalman questions this, because Rav Shlomo Zalman says maybe he won't like it, maybe he won't want it, maybe he'll return it. And so for Rav Shlomo Zalman does question that. I don't fully understand that, because surely it's still got a din of a kli suda when he receives it, and maybe will take it back to the store and exchange it, or okay, maybe Rav Shlomo Zalman means that he won't use it at all, or he'll use it as something to put on the in the cupboard, in the glass cabinet, as decoration, not something for usage. But either way, Rav Shlomo Zalman questions that. So that's one eitzah of Rabbi Sternbuch, and then the second eitzah is the second advice, the second suggestion is that use the gift yourself as a kli suda and then give it. So, for example, I want to buy my non-religious neighbor a challah knife, let's say, and or some whatever it may be, a new whiskey glass, a set of whiskey glasses, and I know that he's not going to tevel it, so I just tevel it myself. I'll have a whiskey in it, and then wash it out, wrap it up nicely, and give it to the person. That would work, because again, now it's become a kli suda, and then later it transforms into a kli matana. Of course, it's not such a sort of a convenient solution, because in both situations, in the second suggestion, when you use it yourself and then you give it away, if you're going to be teveling it, and even actually, in both suggestions actually, you've got to take off all the stickers and you've got to tevel it without any chatzitza. And I guess it's not so convenient, in the shop, you buy it and they wrap it up and it's all good to go. But for you to come home and unwrap it and take off all the labels, which sometimes are very tricky, and then to be tevel it and then to give it, it's not always so neat and convenient. But either way, that's from Moshe Sternbuch's two suggestions. You give it to a third party to acquire it on behalf of the recipient, or you use the gift yourself and then you give it. Just to conclude, Rabbi Osher Weiss takes a more relaxed approach about this, and he says that you can tevel it on behalf of the recipient. And his svara simply is that the keli ultimately is a klei suda. of course, this is a knife or a whiskey glass that is going to be used directly with food. It's just that you, the giver, haven't got a chiyuv to be tovel it. But it is a klisuda, and therefore the tefillah would be effective because ultimately it is a klisuda. If you look at the bottom box, it says the Minchas in Keilim Gimel Siman Hey. He says that it's pasha that does work even though I'm not mitzuva. It's not my chiyuv to be'etzem klisudahem. At the end of the day, inherently this is a klisuda. It's just that the owner of the store is exempt, is parta from being tovel them, and therefore. I haven't got a chiyuv to do it, but it works. It's an effective tefillah. The tefillah works. But ideally, you shouldn't do this for a totally different reason. Why not? Because I can't do it with a bracha. Me, the person who I'm doing it for somebody else, so therefore I can't make a bracha on that. However, he says the eitzah would be if I'm going to the Keilim mikveh anyway to tovel some of my things which require a bracha. So if I want to add in something I'm going to give as in his case as a kli schora or kli matana, that would also work. And therefore, Rabbi Weiss would say that you can do tefillah on behalf of the recipient. So, just to summarize, what have we said? We've talked about Tevilas Keilim for gifts. It's connected to this week's parsha because Klei Midjan, this is the source of Tevilas Keilim, as described in this week's Sedra, that Elazar speaks to the Anshe Hatzova and tells them this Zois Chukas HaTorah of Kol Asher Lo Yovu B'Eish Taviru B'Mayim. And we've discussed that the Shulchan Aruch says that when we come to a knife, Lachtoich Klofim, Ein Tzorich Lat Biloi, and the Taz brings in the name of the Beis Yosef, so too Keilim used for schora as well. And therefore, the owner of a shop, if he buys merchandise and he wants to resell it, he would not be able to tefillah because for him it's not kli suda. The extension of that is when it comes to buying gifts, that you shouldn't need tevilah, as for you they're klei maton or they're not klei suda, and therefore it's better not to tovel before giving a gift, says Ramosha Sternbuch. However, in addition, a receiver a gift should, whether giver, the person has toveled it, it's best to tovel it without a bracha in case the halach is like the Issa V'Het, as I've explained. And the big question is, when you're buying a gift for a non-religious person who won't tovel it, says Ramosha Sternbuch, two suggestions: you either give it to a third party to be koina, to acquire it on behalf of the recipient. Others do question that, or to use the gift yourself and then give it. Rosh Weiss, as I've said, says that you can tovel it on behalf of the recipient, and for the reasons explained. Okay, we'll leave it at that.